אין לי בת. אוקיי. אתה יכול להתחיל.
כן?
כן, כן.
Okay. I am Aryeh Halivni, along with Peleg Levy, sitting with Sydney Rabinovich in Queens, New York, on November 29th, 2017. Why don't we start with a little bit about your family's background, where your parents are from, or if you know where your grandparents are from.
I was born in Canada, Montreal, Canada. I came here when I was 2 years old. Me and my older and younger brother were born in Montreal. We all came here. And my 3 younger siblings were born in New York. Eventually, we moved into the Lower East Side, where my grandfather owned a house. Just to give you an idea, nobody else wanted to live in that house, wooden steps, one of the old tenements. And before my last aunt moved out, part of the building collapsed. We grew up on the Lower East Side. All of us went to the yeshiva, grade school. I went to, my other brothers also went to public high school. I had a little college. My other siblings graduated college.
Where were your parents from?
My father was from Romania, my mother from Austria.
And did they meet in Canada, or they came already to Canada together?
No, they met in Canada. Do you want to? She knows more about it than I do.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh.
they had a big family in Canada. Both sides. You could close the window.
And until we grew up, we started to work.
Where do you? And what kind of school did you go to?
Stewart Park High School, a regular public high school. And my brother went to Stuyvesant. My sister went to, I think she went to Stewart Park also. And my brothers as well. They English, a regular public high school.
And when were you born?
I was born October 6, 1921.
Okay. Were your parents observant?
Yes. You can speak up.
The reason they came to New York was that the parents wanted the kids to have a Jewish education. And so they came down. He was 2 years old. They came down to live on the Lower East Side.
Well, there was Jewish education in Montreal too, but
Okay. So you had observant families. Did you have other relatives in New York?
either what?
Do you have other relatives in New York? Other family?
You know, we have all kind of relatives. Some observant, some not, some extreme right.
When you were growing up already, you had other relatives
You know, in the same building.
in the same building.
It's my grandfather's building, and we lived there, and my grandfather and his wife, and their daughter and grandson, and my other 2 aunts, uncles, and their family. We all lived in the same building.
Okay. Growing up, did you ever talk about Eretz Israel or Zionism or anything of that sort?
Not really. I belong to a Jewish organization, Tzirei Agudas Yisrael, which is more a religious organization, and that was the group that my friends belonged to, so I joined up there.
Okay.
We once, I guess, in the 1930s, we started to hear about what's going on in Israel. We weren't directly involved. My family personally didn't have anybody living there at the time. All we did, my uncle and my aunt lived there, and my grandfather went there to die in the 1930s.
Your grandfather went to Israel to die?
Yeah, they lived in Canada,
Uh-huh.
and he was getting old. He wanted to die in Israel, so he went there to die.
Really? And he's buried in Israel?
Yeah.
Okay. So you grow up, you finished high school, and then...
I started a year of college. My own problem. Started college, and I sort of didn't care. Not that I got wild or anything. My brothers and my sister, they all went to college.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then what did you go to do? You went to work?
Yeah, I worked with my father.
What was his profession?
He had a store selling supplies to factories. It wasn't a very good job or a very good profession. And then when the draft came, and I was 20 plus.
Well, do you remember, I guess you would obviously remember Pearl Harbor.
Very well.
Yeah. But at that point, were you already aware of what was going on in Europe? Were you thinking about, were people starting to think about what might happen?
Yeah, well, we knew because in the Jewish organization, a couple of people who just came from Europe who had families there, so we were aware of things going on. And then when the draft came, I spoke to my mother, and I said, look, Ma, I'm going to go anyway, so let me volunteer for what I want. And my mother said, don't rush. When they call you, you'll go. And my mother was the bravest one of all. She had 5 children go, all during the war. Well, the last one went right after the war. And my brother went on the Aryeh bet to Israel, and I went to the Israeli army. Mother never made one complaint. She says, what are you going to do in Israel? I said, the Israeli boys have to go to the army, so we're going to work on the kibbutz. She knew it wasn't true, but she accepted it.
Well, before that, so you went in, you had to go to the American Army.
Yeah, I was American Army 3.5 years.
When did you get drafted?
June 42.
Oh, you enlisted? Okay.
And I got discharged December 45.
And where were you?
I was in Africa, Italy, France, Germany.
What'd you do?
I was in the quartermaster. I had a fairly easy job giving out supplies. We serviced the frontline troops, but our job was fairly easy, just handing out supplies.
And you were in Germany at the end of the war?
Yeah. And our unit was scheduled to go to India, but then they dropped the atom bomb, so we went home.
Mm-hmm. Did you, while you were there, did you become aware of what was going on with the Holocaust?
We knew very well.
Yeah. How early did you know?
Pardon?
How early did you know?
The families would talk about it. I mean, we didn't have any relatives there except for my aunt, but we all knew that things were going on, not as bad, but we knew things were going on.
And do you remember seeing survivors from the Holocaust when you were still in the Army?
Yeah, and
at the end?
Yeah. In fact, we took care of 1 or 2 young men who had been in the camps and was out loose, so we tried to help them a couple of times.
Okay. And then you were discharged and you went back, and where'd you go?
went home with my parents, went back to work with my father.
Your older brother, how many of you were in the U.S. Army?
5, 4 during the war and 1 right after. My older brother went to live in Washington to work for the government. I guess that was after the Army too.
And how many, and were they discharged around the same time as you were?
No,
Okay.
I was the first one.
All right. Okay, so then you went back and you worked for your father. And then...
And somebody else too. There was no living there, so sometimes I worked outside to make some money, and then I went back. Don't ask me why.
Okay. And then, how did you... What were the steps? What happened next? What led to you deciding?
We read the paper every day, listened to the radio, and things in Palestine were getting worse. And I started going to the Jewish organization. They would speak about it regularly. And again, I told Larry 2 or 3 weeks ago, I tried to remember what pushed me to volunteer. I don't remember. I mean, I was hearing these stories all the time. And again, one of the stories that kept repeating itself is, what can we do? What can I do? What can anybody do? And again, I still can't tell you what happened, but one day I went to the Israeli and American-Israeli organization, and I said, can I sign up? This is, now I'm talking about January 48. In November 47, the UN passed the resolution that Palestine would be split in 2, Jewish and Arab. And this was already 2 months after.
Do you remember that? Do you remember hearing about the vote for the...
I remember very well. We listened to it. We went around collecting money for Israel. And
today is 70 years. Today is November 29th.
Yeah.
So it's the 70th anniversary of the vote.
So anyway, I went to a couple of organizations. I was signing up for Israel. They never heard of it. I spoke to my friends. Finally, one day I get a call. They're starting a Land and Labor for Israel organization. Again, I don't know what started that, but I went up there. They spoke to me. They said, go get a passport, a visa. And they said, don't ask for a visa for Palestine, you won't get it. South America is good. So I got a visa. I went back to the organization. They had been in contact with about a dozen other people, half from Boston, half from New York, who wanted to volunteer to go to Israel. So it was finally decided that we would all go to a camp in the Catskills for a few days to meet a couple of shlichim from Israel who would teach us what to look forward to, and then we would sail to Israel. Well, the two who came from Israel, I think they wanted to teach us how to fight like Robin Hood with sticks. All right. We had a couple of days in the country, and then they told us to go to the airport. Went to the airport, I guess we had to go by train or whatever. Not the airport, the port. And we went to buy our tickets for the train to get out. And one of the boys' mothers came along, and she was crying. It was her only son, And she told our leader, take care of him, please. He was the one that got killed. We boarded the ship. We went on a freighter passenger, American ship, stopped in Italy, Greece, Beirut, Tel Aviv, and Cairo. I mean, every month it made it this. So we got on, we stopped in Italy, stopped in Greece. We were able to get off for a night. When we hit Beirut, our people said, don't get off. We didn't get off. We went to Tel Aviv, to Haifa. Some young man came over, said, get your stuff. We all went out, got on a bus. While we were in the bus, they put steel shutters over the windows. Haifa was then Arab, almost entirely. We had to go up the mountainside to get into, I keep forgetting names, but to get into Carmel. We got on the bus went up the hill to Carmel, took us to our hotel in Tel Aviv. There was a British patrol right in front of our hotel with the British soldiers, one of the soldiers holding a machine gun in his hand. He said, oh, they won't go. He was riding with a machine gun in his hand.
Can you put this on the side? It's making a lot of noise. Just, yeah, okay, that's it.
What happened is the following trip, exactly 1 month later, the ship pulled into Beirut. The Lebanese police got on, arrested all the young Americans who were going to Palestine, threw them in jail. This was with the permission of the U.S. State Department. And about a week later, they send them back home.
Do you remember the name of that boat?
Marine Corps.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about it all a long time. You remember?
So we just heard the story a couple days ago.
So,
Someone else went on that same trip?
well, that was the only ship that was going.
Oh.
It was too expensive to fly. And from Haifa, we flew to a camp in I forget that.
You don't have it written down?
Oh, how can I write down the Israeli capital? They took over a British camp, then they flew us to another camp down south, and we became part of Givati Brigade. General Givati himself came over to greet us. And I don't speak Hebrew, but some of the fellows understood. And then we were on duty. We did different things. We went out. One thing we did at night, all around, we were pretty south. And the army coming up from Egypt would have come up from the south towards where we were. And one of the officers took us out on the field there, and to introduce us to the area, we were on a hill. He says, Arab, Jewish, Arab, Jewish. He went around the whole area, pointing out which ones were Arab, which ones were Jewish. And without saying so much, because the Jews insisted that they never chased the Arabs out of Palestine, the Arabs had to get out of there, because when the Arab army came up, they would have friends behind the lines. So almost every night, in the first place, they called us in to issue us rifles. The rifles were from World War I, ugly-looking rifles. That's all they had. They didn't have enough for everybody. So when we went on a mission, they gave us a rifle. We came back. We gave them back the rifle. And went on night after night. We'd go. I guess the Israelis arrange it with the Arabs. The Israelis must have told them, look, the Arabs are going to invade, the Arab nations are going to invade Israel on May 14th. The original UN date was May 15th, but that's a Saturday. So Israel changed the date to May 14th. So the Israelis told all the Arab villages, look, you want to stay here? You don't know what's going to happen. If you want to leave, you can leave now with all your possessions. Nobody will bother you. So what happened, every night, they had to be pushed a little. Every night we went behind one house. We made a little noise. The people in there heard us. They left. The next night we went to another house. And in order to get to the houses, we couldn't take the road because the British were still there patrolling, and sometimes the Arab gang would be on the road. So we had to go up and down the hill, and it wasn't easy because we weren't used to that night after night. But little by little, one time we went in the back of a house. It was growing cactus. Our lieutenant said, march. We went through the cactus. For the next 6 weeks, we had medical call. We had to get up in the morning, and they would pull the cactus out of our feet and out of our hands. There were areas where the Arabs were making problem. We went there. We attacked a couple of big islands, which we captured. Again, names. I forget names all the time. But we did something, and we're getting close to, now we're up May. We did a number of things. Oh yeah, well, I forgot. I should have looked. One of the things we did is one day they told us we're going over to a Irgun camp. I wrote his name down here. Menachem Begin ran the Irgun. He wanted the Irgun to be part of the Israeli army. He collected a lot of equipment and a lot of money, and he wanted the Irgun to be not part of the Israeli army, but in the Israeli army. But Ben Gurion said no, and they had a couple of clashes, and they had a ship.
Altalena.
Huh?
The Altalena.
The Altalena. We happened to be in the area when the Altalena pulled into Kfar Vitkin, and there was some shooting going on. The Israeli army against the Irgun. Some of my friends were on the Altalena. Finally, when I was in Tel Aviv at a certain period, the Altalena pulled right there, right in the front of the hotel, and I was standing right there. He stood there, and all of a sudden, the Israeli army came, some police or soldiers came. They chased us off the pier, and I guess they ordered the Altalena to surrender. They didn't. They opened fire. They killed some of the soldiers in Altalena. There they were, swimming in the water, but they wouldn't give up. Finally, afterwards, they were friends of mine, Americans. They joined the army as well, but they wanted to be under their own.
Who were your friends that were on there?
Names?
Do you remember? Warsaw?
Krauscher.
Krauscher? Warsaw?
Krauscher.
Krauscher.
Dave Gann. I forget the other name. Anyway, they came, and I assume most of them joined the army. And at the beginning, our group anyway, all newcomers. They call them, we're going to have training now for the army. They took us by a big field, nothing surrounding it, people walking on the other side. They gave us Sten guns. Sten gun was a gun made from a couple of pieces of metal that the Israelis used because there weren't enough rifles. So you put 2 bullets in the Sten gun, you pull the trigger, you hope they work, and if they worked, you're in the army. Then when they had enough people shooting, they took us up on a hill, and somebody went up and made a speech in Hebrew. You raised your right hand, Ani Nishba, and we were soldiers. We were all soldiers. Some of the Americans wouldn't sign. They didn't raise their hand. They were volunteered, but they didn't want to be too official.
What did you do?
Huh?
What did you do?
Ani Nishba. I mean, what was the government going to do to me? See, now I need a better light to remind myself what I'm saying. While we were in the army, they tried to teach us Hebrew, but we went out almost every night. If we didn't go to an Arab village, we went to straighten some other people out. Well, this light isn't the best. Here I have, so one time they told us we're going to the Irgun camp. The Irgun was Menachem Begin's baby. He wanted his own army to be part of the Israeli army. They wouldn't give up their arms or whatever. So we, from our camp, we went to their camp. They had a fence, and it's certainly a fence surrounding them. And as we approached, their mothers, Irgun mothers, were in front of the tent. And they yelled at us, "Go fight the Arabs. Why are you fighting the Jews? Go fight the Arabs." And a couple of our lieutenants, we weren't involved. That was the officer business. So the officers went down there to speak to the mothers, to speak to the soldiers. Finally, one of our officers said, "Surround the camp." And we all stood up around. And not all the Israelis, but we stood up. No one did anything. And finally, the guy said, "Let's go home." So we went home. Didn't accomplish anything, didn't do anything. There was almost one shock. One of our fellows, a friend of someone from our group who went with us from Boston, he was sitting on the side while this negotiations were going on. He had his finger on the trigger and pulled the trigger. Luckily, he was holding it like this, so the shot went up. Everybody jumped, but everybody kept their peace, and we all went home. I wrote other things here, but I can't see to them.
Did you know anybody when you went? Was there anybody that you knew beforehand that also signed up?
Not with me, no. Later, yes.
Later, yes, meaning...
They came later.
Yeah, who came later?
Hmm?
Who came later?
Sam Lipsky. I don't know if you know him. A couple of women came. A Drillig, a woman Drillig. Another woman who I knew I didn't. And then during one of our trips out, a captain says, "Can anybody drive a Bren carrier?" A Bren was a British mini tank. It was all metal, had a machine gun, was a very good fighter. If we had one Bren, we wouldn't have needed those rifles, but nobody knew how to drive a Bren, and we didn't see any that day anyway. But a few times we went out, and if we could, we would try to collect some ammunition. Oh yeah, I told you about the Arab and Jewish villages. One by one, we put them out of commission. We wanted to take a Latrun. By this time, Jerusalem was completely encircled. Nothing can get in, nothing can get out. And they really didn't have not enough ammunition, didn't have enough food or water. So they sent a detail from our group to try to break through the Arab line to get to Jerusalem. And it sounds so foolish. Larry brought me a picture of Latrun, the fort. They sent about a dozen of us with these old rifles. The fort had up-to-date ammunition and up-to-date guns and machine guns and artillery. But they send us to open a path to get to Jerusalem. So what happened as we approached the place, there was a mountain about 200 yards before the entrance to Latrun. Latrun had a very big police station and a fort, but they were off the road. And before that, on the road, there was another a low mountain, which we went on. It was evening. We were waiting until the next morning, which we didn't know what was going to happen. In the morning, we're lying on the ground. My friend has his finger like right here for my face. One of my Boston friends. He says, "Look, I just got shot." And then we look around. We just woke up. They had the artillery shells falling on us while we were lying on the ground. So we all ran off the mountain. You know, they put us up front because we were all trained. That long run, we got off the mountain. Once you were off the mountain, you were okay. But there were wounded lying all around. If we got off, we had to pick up a wounded, put them on a truck, and they drove them back to our camp. Now there were nothing to carry the wounded on. You could put them a rifle with a coat underneath, or you just carry them. Put them in the truck. We loaded up a truck and we went. And that night, this was May 13th. That night we had to stand guard where we were. And the next day, the Arab army moves in. So what my company did, we moved to Ashdod, which was on the coastal road, but it protected Tel Aviv. We were the last protection for Tel Aviv. Between us and Tel Aviv, we were the last protection because there was no men.
Was Fallujah, is that...
No, we weren't near Fallujah. Not my... I heard the name, but yeah. we weren't there.
What about... did you have friends who got wounded or killed?
Yeah.
In Latrun?
Oh, wait, I missed the important part. When we were on the mountain outside of Latrun, I told you, the shells started to come down, the artillery. So we all got off and ran out to the open field and gathered there. And then any way we could, we rode home. When we got home, we found out that two of our friends from Brooklyn had been killed. Now they had been killed, they couldn't find a body.
What were their names?
Pardon?
What were their names?
Jerry Kaplan and Mendel Math. That's one of their names I showed you, and that's one of their names I want to discuss later. It's a long, long story. Here, Jerry Kaplan. What happened when we couldn't get through to Jerusalem? The Israelis decided to build another road almost beneath Latrun. Latrun was a fairly new road, so they put Mickey Marcus, you know Mickey Marcus, they put him in charge, and they're building a new road to Jerusalem. This was just before the Arabs' attack started. One night, as they worked night and day, but they didn't have much time. One night, Marcus had to go to the bathroom. So the way you work, when you work on a road, you go to the bathroom, you go a couple of yards ahead of the group, and you do what you have to do, and you come back. So Marcus had to go, and he told the guard, I'll be back in a few minutes. I don't know what happened. They changed the guard. When he came back, they challenged him. Misham or whatever. He said, it's me. They killed him. And the funny thing is, it was his own instructions. He knew that we were going against the Legion. Legion had a lot of British soldiers, English speaking, and British soldiers. They were led by British officers. So he said, it's me. He said he killed him. Mickey Marcus is buried in West Point with Jerusalem Stone, and our organization held a meeting, a gathering once a year around Yom Ha'atzmaut in the Jewish chapel and at the cemetery.
Did you know him, Mickey Marcus?
Not well. I met him, but
You met him, but you didn't.
let's see. Well, I want to see before I go to the next page. Anyway, so Mickey Marcus, they killed him, but he finished the job. We were stationed a little bit away from there, but when the Arabs attacked, they moved my company, I told you, to Ashdod, which was on the coastal road on the way to Tel Aviv, but we were the last line of defense. After us, there was nobody there. Now, to get back to the Arab army, I think they had an army of 20,000. They had tanks. They couldn't break into any kibbutz. None of the kibbutzim would surrender. And it was impossible to understand. That's why even Israelis thought we'd all get killed. Because, I mean, there weren't enough rifles to go around for the Israelis. And here's a whole tank full of whatever. But the Arabs, there was no leader. There was nobody to make them go. They moved a little bit, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, came a couple of Israeli jets. Arabs didn't even, no one knew that Israel had fighter pilots. These were the first Israeli fighter pilots that came from Czechoslovakia. American had set up an organization to buy the pilots, to train the pilots, and to get regular pilots, but all this took time. It had to go through Europe. These were the first planes to come out, and they weren't battle ready yet, but you could fly them, and they flew them over the Arab line. After that, the Arabs quit. They called a ceasefire. when the Arabs called to ceasefire, Britain left. It was the time, the UN resolution, time for the British to go. They left. The port opened up. Stuff came pouring in, not pouring in, coming in Israel. The British had opened up a camp, internment camp in Cyprus. This was right outside the Mediterranean for Israelis who they didn't let go into Israel. But now that England wasn't there, they opened up the camp, and the Israelis, the Jews from the camp, kept streaming in. I mean, a lot of people, and many of them were trained.
Do you know a guy named, he spells his name differently, but Joe Rabinowitz?
No.
Okay.
Where was he from?
I don't know if he was from Chicago or New York. I can't remember.
Oh, Joe was a brother of mine.
No, somebody who was in Machal.
No.
Yeah. Did anybody from your family come in on Machal and volunteer?
My brother went on Aryeh bet, picked up the Jews in Europe, drove them towards Palestine. The British captured them and put them on Cyprus.
Which boat was he on?
Jewish state, Medina Israel. I can't even read what I wrote.
You want me to look? Vidal Sassoon, did you know Vidal Sassoon?
I knew the name, but I didn't know him.
Okay.
The French hairdresser, right?
British hairdresser.
British, right. He was there at the time? He was a volunteer?
Yeah. The British volunteer.
Jacques Siboni knew him. We might have met him at a party. We knew a Moroccan community here in Forest Hills.
I try to make only headlines, but I can't even read that. I just have a few more stories. Even after what happened at with the invasion of the Arabs, they finally moved back, and I forget. Among the things that came off when the gates opened up, among the equipment came in were 2 artillery pieces. Artillery, World War I France. These are cannon. They came in. Israel never had any cannon. They didn't know what to do. So the Israeli army put out a notice to all Machal volunteers. We're starting an artillery unit. If you can, please join us. So I joined them. What happened, we went to Tel Aviv. They had the 2 cannon on the grass. We went behind the wall. They put a couple of shells in the cannon. While they were behind the wall, they pulled the lanyard, or whatever you call it, to shoot the cannon. They didn't explode. We were all trained. The next day, we headed north. We wanted to get them in position because the truce was running out. So we arrived in Rosh Pina, and from Rosh Pina, we took a road right opposite Syria. There was a main road coming from Syria to the road, and then make a left turn, and you're on your way to Israel, Tel Aviv. What happened? Right next to the main road was a mountain, a hill. Let's put it that way. every day, one or two of our fellows would climb up the hill. From the road, which was like in a valley, we couldn't see Syria. If you went to the top of the hill, you could see Syria. So every day, we exchanged firearms. They'd shoot at us, we'd shoot. Oh yeah, in fact, from us, I don't know if anybody knew anything about artillery, except one man. His name was Mike, and he was an Australian Christian. And he was in charge of us, and he did a good job. We didn't even have any shovels to dig a hole in case they were shooting at us. When they shot at us, we had to lie down on the ground. We got away lucky. But anyway, Davy Boxey, you know that name? He was up on the hill on duty. He says, they're coming. The Assyrian army and the tanks crossed the Syrian border and were heading for us. We had about 40 people. We had no rifle. We didn't even have the bad rifles because we had the machine guns. So Mike, he organized the two cannon. He changed some of the dials, whatever you do. So instead of shooting far, they would shoot low. After about, we kept busy loading the things. After 15, 20 minutes, who knows, maybe an hour, the Syrians retreated back into Syria. I mean, it was one miracle after another. I want to see if I'm missing anything else. Give me the flashlight that's above this thing, please.
Who was it who was sitting with you and the bullet came and took his finger?
Yeah, Al Glassman.
What was that?
Al Glassman.
Oh, Al Glassman, right. Leaky boxer. I'm coming.
You guys gonna read this way? Yeah, this is good.
Oh, maybe that's better.
So we had, while we were stationed with the artillery, we had a couple of rounds with the Syrians. They were able to see us, apparently, because once we were on the way from Rosh Pina to our base was just an open area. They were shooting at us. So the driver went faster, they followed us. The driver went onto the low fields, and they followed us. And we all jumped out of the car eventually because we had to get away. But one of the most interesting and meaningful things happened when I was serving in the Israeli Navy. After a while, they let us pick our own branch. When I got there was only Army. After the Arab invasion failed and the British left, started an Air Force, and it started many others, and we all had our choice. We could go wherever we wanted. I went to the Navy. Two of my friends had been radar operators in the American Navy, so I volunteered for radar operator. Our Navy consisted of 4 ships. 3 were Aryeh bet ships. They had a little military use, but not much. Mostly they were used for Aryeh bet. But they were there ready, so they made them the Navy. Right after the Arabs failed, a ship came in, a small Coast Guard ship, but it had a radar that wasn't working. It had a machine gun emplacement that was empty, but it was a faster ship. So I joined up for the Navy. We patrolled the Mediterranean, and we had to, it wasn't very busy at the time because that war was just over. I mean, the war was still on, but the activity was over, but people came, and mostly Jewish coming to Israel. So we patrolled again, and we checked and everything. We heard that the Egyptians had bought a submarine. We went to look for the submarine. We heard another story, whatever. We went to look, and we were busy. The naval captain was an American West Pointer, not West Pointer, Annapolis. And he'd been in the American Navy a short while because he was fairly young. One day, the four of us, usually we went separate or 1, 2 together, or 4 of us going straight, and the captain took over our ship. So he was captain of his ship. We see a sign, Gaza. He makes a left turn. We ride along a little bit. There's Gaza. There's the King Farouk. Right there, 2 miles in front of us. You heard of King Farouk?
Tell me.
The King Farouk was a flagship of the Egyptian Navy. Every once in a while, it would sail out into the Mediterranean and shell Tel Aviv, whatever it felt like doing.
1 second. Okay.
It would shell Tel Aviv, but it didn't go all over the place. It taking care of itself. Here we make the left turn, and there's the King Farouk. I mean, I'm staring at it, and the other one is right there, and we're about, let's say, 2 miles out, the 4 of us. And we hear, it was a fairly small ship. I was on the open deck where the machine gun hadn't come yet, but from the radar section to the open deck was 1 door. Pushed the door open, and I'm on the open deck. I'm the only one on the outside. Everybody else is undercover somewhere in the ship. So I could hear the captain talking. It was a small ship. We have 4, they have 2. I mean, he was counting the Aryeh bet ships against the King Farouk, which is a battleship. And the Israeli said, there's a truce on, which is the reason he was able to turn into Gaza, because a truce had gone into it. The Arabs had put into a truce to that effect. So he felt, and while I'm watching this, I look up, and on the deck of the King Farouk, there's machine guns, somebody behind each machine gun, pointing, all of them pointing at me. All of a sudden we move in a zigzag form towards the Farouk. Every time we moved, I'm on the deck, I got nothing to do. I'm watching those machine guns following me. What do they want from me? They follow me until we got fairly close to the King Farouk. Again, I couldn't judge on a ship how far, but it wasn't very far. And we stopped. The other ships moved back out into the Mediterranean, and after we stopped towards the Farouk, we started out toward the other ships. And it was nighttime. All of a sudden, I don't know if you'll see this anyplace, an American battleship comes out with I don't want to say, 1 million lights on. 1 million lights, all lit up, front, back, high, low. I mean, this was a war area. And I guess the Egyptians complained that we were harassing them, or whatever. Again, I don't know. But the battleship, he just sailed right. It was pitch dark, and all of a sudden it's midday. You know, it took him a while till he sailed by. Anyway, so we stayed in.
What was the name of your ship? Do you remember?
The Noga, how did the Hebrew name? I forget the Hebrew name. The Noga. It was our main warship while we were there, and we got back to Tel Aviv to. To Haifa. Haifa was the base. That was a naval base. You know, the naval base is part of a church. There was a church there, and the British made the naval base right there. So that if you bombed the base, you were bombing a church. But anyway, the story we got is that we sank the Farouk and the other ship without the loss of one Israeli. And nobody was talking about it. Egyptians didn't want to tell everybody they lost their flagship.
Wait, how did they lose the ship?
Oh, well, I'll get there. Oh, yeah. Well, I found that out later.
Okay.
The Egyptians didn't want to advertise that they lost the Farouk, and the Israelis didn't want to advertise that they sank it during a truce period. The way they sank the ship is, I found out much later, because I read it in my brother's book. He wrote a book in which he mentioned the incident. The Italians had found a way that you could roll a torpedo up, put it on a flatbed wood platform, push it, have a swimmer behind it, pushing it until it was in position, and press a button, torpedo would go down and ship whatever it was aiming at. So we didn't know, but we never knew. We knew another ship came in, but we didn't know what happened. But 2 Israeli frogmen, each one with a torpedo on a wood stand in the water, pushing the stand towards the ships, and when they were within reach, whatever, they released them, and both ships sank.
And you were right there?
Well, by this time we were back out in the sea. We didn't see.
Ah, so this is after you left?
That was after we left.
You had the standoff with them, staring each other down?
In other words, yeah, I think that was the main reason. Now, for instance, the flagship, with all its cannon, it could have sunk all 4 ships in about a minute and a half, no problem. We had nothing to hit it. Two of our ships had a machine gun, but that doesn't do much good against the warship. But we stood there, we knocked them off balance, I would say. All of a sudden, we sailed right into their headquarters.
And the American warship that went through?
Well, we don't know what happened to it. That was in the Mediterranean. Never heard a word. None of Israelis ever said a word about it. So, I guess somebody knows what happened, but I think the Egyptians were complaining that we were attacking, and the ship came to see what could be done. But didn't do them any good. I think that was the last. Oh yeah, I have one more short story. On the ship, you know, we all had a bed, a berth or bed, whatever. One night, I must have been fast asleep because all of a sudden I'm awake. And it's quiet. I said to myself, why did I wake up? And I'm lying there. I realize silence. It's quiet. What does that mean? The motor stopped. You know, it took me a couple of seconds to realize that. The motor stopped. I'm lying in bed. It's quiet. About 2 minutes later, over the loudspeaker, wake up the mechanic. Mechanic wasn't a real mechanic, he was also a volunteer. All right, wake up the mechanic. About 3, 4 minutes later, the mechanic is sick. A minute later, wake up the doctor. I mean, it's funny, like in the movies. You know, you're lying there, and all of a sudden, you don't see anything, but you hear. Wake up the doctor. About 5 minutes later, you hear a motor. That's all. There were three sayings, and it was over. But we were happy to hear. Okay, that was the last article I wrote, the last thing I wrote on it. So you asked me questions about almost everything that I can see anyway. But
how long did you stay in Israel?
Until February February 49. By then, in February, the United Nations prevailed upon Egypt to sign a truce. No, not a temporary truce, but a truce so the fighting would stop. They didn't end the war. They just made I don't know what you call it in the official language, but the truce was that the war was over. So and I brought home a friend of mine who wasn't feeling so well, but we flew home, and a couple of more of my friends came home, and that was it.
Did you consider staying?
Some people did. I didn't. I wanted to come back to my family.
You wanted to come to meet me.
What were you going to tell me about Jerry Kaplan and...
Before we get into that, and around, right after I met Edie, I started an organization. Actually, someone else started it 10 years earlier, but they stopped after a couple of months. American Veterans of Israel. American who volunteered to serve in Israel war. That included the Irgun. Anyway, so we started in 1940, and I ran it until the turn of the century, the year 2000. And then for several reasons I stopped. And but for 30-some years, we had hundreds and hundreds of members from U.S. and Canada and South Africa. And there was an organization. We built a place in Jerusalem for a yearly get-together sponsored by American Veterans of Israel. In fact, pull over that. This was part of that crew. I didn't know anybody from here. I didn't know anybody here. I was part of the crew. Here they gave in the New York Post, they gave us a write-up in 19, whatever, those who served. This is a salute. This was a Salute to Israel parade, 1974 it looks like.
Did you know Sam Burstein? Samuel Burstein?
Yeah. I knew his wife, what was her name?
I don't know.
He wrote a book, didn't he, Sam?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rabbi with Wings.
Yeah, I think we have it here.
Somebody just took it to read it, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's here.
And this is a memorial service in Israel, and that's me and some other veteran.
Somebody just took that. That's Sydney. Photograph.
It's nice, very nice.
That's Sydney.
What picture is that? You know what happened here? When we volunteered for Israel, there was another group of Americans who were going on to start a kibbutz. When they started the kibbutz, they called us. So I went over there for the day they started to build the kibbutz. I went over there, and somebody took a picture and put it there. So now I'm famous. Yeah, what I wanted to tell you about the other thing was, let me get this. You want to, what's the name of that street again? Tell me.
Which street? That,
Where they, I saying those guys with the
Latrun? By
Latrun.
Yeah.
Why do I keep forgetting Latrun? Latrun I had every day in my mind for years, and it just escapes me. He got two not fat, but formative things about Latrun. And the reason he's interested is because I told him we were in Latrun, and the two boys were killed, and he couldn't find it any place. I couldn't find it any place. So first, we'll get back to the whole story. We went there to open the road to Jerusalem, but we got slaughtered there. After the fighting, we went back to the base, and Jerry Kaplan and Mandel Math were missing. I mean, some Israeli troops went back to the mountain area, to the hill, couldn't find them. And trying to remember, couldn't find them. And we felt terrible.
Did you know that they died?
What?
Did you know that they died already, or you didn't know?
No, somebody had seen them.
Somebody had seen them get killed.
And I just can't remember something. Anyway, we tried to find out what happened. Couldn't. I assume the Israeli Magen David tried to get some information. Couldn't. This was in 1948. Now we switch back to within the last 20 years. I'm talking about the last 20 years. There was an article in the New York Times about something odd that happened in Israel after the Civil War. Two bodies were missing. I think they named them Jerry, and two bodies were missing. they had, I'm sorry, 2 bodies were found that had no identification. They had names of 2 people who were missing, whose bodies were missing.
Right.
So they combined them, and one became Jerry, and one became Mandel. And did you ever hear anything about that?
No.
Now, I say this was an article, a regular news article in the New York Times. I think by that time, the American Veterans of Israel, I wasn't involved there anymore, so I couldn't find out anything. But do you think you can find out something?
I'll take a look. I'll see if I can find anything.
But again, it was in the Times, so I assume somebody somewhere should have some information.
Yeah.
Especially if it was in the Times, somebody reads the Times.
Okay, I'll look.
I mentioned it to a couple of people. Nobody saw it. Nobody heard about it. But because it was odd that, well, I guess bodies disappear all the time, but all right. So that's what I wanted to ask you.
Is there,
I knew the Kaplan family. I used to go, they'd eat every couple of months. Then they moved to California, and they were both elderly. And the mother, I guess the father was stepfather, but the mother was the mother, and she took it badly.
do you have any regrets about this whole period or anything that you,
Look, I came back alive. I have a lovely family. So,
how do you, any idea that you want to express about the significance of what American Jews helped toward the founding of Israel? Or
well, let me put it this way. As far as Machal goes, American Jews didn't do enough. In fact, we had a meeting with Herzog one time, and he said the same thing. We had a couple of more 1,000 Americans. We would have been way ahead. No, I have nothing. I just got out of the Army, 3.5 years Army. I was home for 2 years. People had a life to go to. You can't blame it. You can't blame anybody for doing more than they could. So didn't hold anything against anybody. I just.
do you think it's important that people from the younger generation know about the role that Americans played in the founding of Israel?
They should. They actually.
Your grandchildren, your.
My grandchildren know already. In fact, you ask my great-granddaughter, she'll tell you who the hero was of the war. She should. Everybody should know.
Okay.
You have anything else you want to ask? Or?
No.
Thank you very much.
I hope I gave you enough.
Yeah, we got great. This is
for it.
fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Like that, we've heard a few stories about Marcus.
Because we didn't take part in that road building, but we were right there. So the first thing we heard is he got killed by his own instructions.
Yeah. But from
They could have been annihilated.
Yeah.